your view of that?
Well, I think that's nonsense argument. I think all its Paralympics has ever thought about is her own job, her own position, and her own personal security, rather than engaging in the job. If you're going to take a big salary, you take a big salary because you're prepared to take the knocks, the book stops at you're accountable. They don't want that. They just want a high tax salary, fine cars, responsibility on that. That's just wrong. The CCRC message way many years ago, it's been letting down many inmates in prison. I've no doubt some have taken their own lives due to being rejected. That's no joke. You know. It's supremely important. This needs to change. The culture needs to change. We need competent people at the top, and people who really care and are compassionate about injustice. That's what we need. Perhaps we could have some advisors in this election process from people like me and followers, because we have a deep insight into what the implications are of mistakes.
Yes, you have insight too, don't you, into the post office as to what happens when the state decides that it's not going to investigate itself because it doesn't want to.
Yeah, and the state is an abstraction. It can become a monstrous thing. It's, in my mind, it's just a group of people who represent the state. So it's human beings making very poor decisions, what we call the state, in my mind. And the state is a monster when it runs amok on a citizen's rights like it did with me. It's truly a monstrous thing. But it has vast power, of course, it's a state.
Andy, I want to ask you about the conversation, but not in detail, but people were really interested. The process is a long one, isn't it? Is it still very long for you? It hasn't ended yet, you haven't actually received that.
Yes, that's right, Justin. We're still in the process of seeking compensation, but it is a long and, I think, personally, unnecessary convoluted pathway. It couldn't be, we could expedite the books almost immediately. Fully exonerated.
So in the meantime, how are you living? How are you able to deal with it?
Well, this is one of my I'm basically living hand to mouth. I'm claiming universal credit, which is about £360 a month. That's £90 a week, by the way. I'm struggling. I'm living benefits and having to also accept gift cards to supermarkets, that kind of thing, because I just can't afford to eat. So that's pretty messed up.
Andy, everyone listening will wish you the very, very best. Thank you so much for talking to us again.
Thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure.
And just to reiterate, the Criminal Cases Review Commission told us last year they couldn't talk to us then because the review was going on, but they said they fully expected to do interviews when in a position to do so. Well, they have turned down all requests to do interviews now.
Still remember coming in to sit in that chair in this studio
and Basil ago.
and I think many people listening will feel the same sense of horror and outrage as they listen to Angela as they did on that particular day. 17 minutes to 8 now. The Olympic Games open next week in Paris, twice before, in 1900 and then more famously in 1924. The French capital has played host to the Games. The 24 Games were where the British runners, Eric Liddell and Harold Abrahams, won golds. Remember then, what you will, from the film Chariots of Fire. Our correspondent in the city, Hugh Schofield, has been seeking out the traces of Paris's Olympic past.
And Naomi wins 4 gold medals, 2 within an hour. The 1924 Paris Games were staged in the western suburb of Cologne, in a purpose-built stadium over what had once been a horse racing track. This is where the athletic events took place, but also gymnastics and cycling, and a century on, it's still very much in use. What's wonderful is that so much of the original setting of those 1924 Games is still here. The opening ceremony took place on this very piece of turf, and along this track, running along here, Harold Abrahams and Eric Liddell of Chariots of Fire fame did their stuff. was France's answer to Wembley. And now today it's back as an Olympic venue for hockey. Sports historian Michael Delépine.
Tous les plus grands, en fait, ont couru, ont frappé dans des balles.
So many great names have run and kicked and tackled in this ground. It's a place that's full of the ghosts of athletes. You can almost see them and hear them. It really is a holy place of sport.
But before 1924, there were the 1900 Paris Games. And they left this superb legacy, the Cipal Velodrome in the Bois de Vincennes, one of the oldest in the world. Gérard Guillory is one of the veteran cyclists taking part today in a club event here.
Les tribunes n'ont pas changé.
The stands haven't changed. The track, okay, it's been redone, but exactly as before. So it's amazing. If someone had been frozen back in 1900 and came back today, he would find the place identical.
1900s were weird games. Because it all took place at the same time as the Paris World Fair, many competitors weren't even aware that they were in the Olympics. And then there were the strange events like boule and artillery firing, hot air ballooning, oh yes, and cricket. The only ever Olympic cricket match took place on this ground in 1900. England against France. England won, but that does mean that France is today the titular silver medal holder in Olympic cricket. Not a lot of people know that.
Games of the 8th Olympiad also gave the movies a star.
Fast forward again to the 1924 Games, and let's not forget the American champion swimmer Johnny Weissmuller, soon to be famous as the first film incarnation of Tarzan. 50 years later, the BBC caught up with him again at the Olympic pool in Paris and asked how his lungs were. They were fine.
That's Gary at the Open.
The speaker here in the studio this morning is Justin Singh for London. Good morning.
Good morning. As much of the country basks on a mini heat wave, it's given me a good excuse to get my traditional Punjabi outfit and colourful printed turbans out of the wardrobe. It's also the perfect way to mark the start of this year's South Asian Heritage Month, with its theme of Free to Be Me, focusing on the uniqueness of what makes us who we are. With the month coming so soon after the general election, I've been reflecting on the diversity within our political system. This Parliament is the highest number of Sikh MPs ever elected in the UK, or indeed anywhere in the world after the Indian Council. 11 men and women from across the country, all dedicated to public service. They encompass what Kirith Entwistle described in her maiden speech as being the Sikh values of seva, service for the betterment of others, and humility. Freedom of belief was also reflected by the number of scriptures and methods used to swear the new MPs in. Most of the Sikh MPs chose to give an oath without holding a holy book, whilst one used the Sunday book, the scriptures Sikhs keep at home for their daily prayers. I would like to think that the fact that these religious swearing-in ceremonies passed by without comment perhaps reflects how we in the UK are very much used to seeing diversity of religious belief in our daily lives. Across the pond this week, sadly, this wasn't the case. At the Republican National Convention, the convention organisers and Donald Trump's team invited a prominent Sikh Republican to the stage and asked her to offer a prayer. It should have been a moment of unity and inclusion, but a response from a small but vocal number of social media commentators, some of whom have hundreds of thousands of followers, has been shocking. She's been accused of invoking a demon, of being a witch, of praying to a foreign god, and of blasphemy. In the self-proclaimed man of the three, it's certainly the thing that she's free to be herself when it comes to her faith. Politics and religion go hand in hand for Sikhs, regardless of the political party they support, and Sikhs are encouraged to be actively involved in their respective countries' political structures and systems. The Sikh Guru himself carried two swords by his side, one to remind him of his spiritual duties and the other to remind him of political responsibilities. I hope that the 11 Sikh MPs in the UK will prove to be a beacon of light and change for Sikhs and for everyone across our communities and across the world. I hope they can inspire many others to follow in their footsteps in their own countries and in accordance with true Sikh values. I pray that they can freely be themselves.
And that was all for the day with Jasveer Singh. It brings us to 10 to 8.
There will be another new face around the cabinet table this morning. Ukraine's President Zelensky has been asked to attend to speak to ministers about his war with Vladimir Putin. Last night he told Chris Mason that he needed permission to use British long-range Storm Shadow missiles to reach targets deep in Russia. Permission that so far he hasn't got.
We need very strong support from Prime Minister. We need this decision about long-distance weapon, long range, to use it. We need it very much. They targeting our hospitals, schools. We just want to answer to the exactly to the point where from there they target us.
But listening to him at the cabinet table this morning will be Britain's new Defence Secretary, John Healey, who joins us for the first time since the general election. Let me just start by saying congratulations to you, Mr. Healey.
Good morning, and thank you.
When he says that to you, and he has no doubt already said to you, why can't I use these missiles in the way that I want? What do you say to him?
Well, first of all, I have met President Zelensky 3 times in the last 2 weeks, so we're stepping up, not slowing down any dialogue with Ukraine, and that reflects the fact that when the Prime Minister said that he wants Britain to continue its steadfast support for Ukraine, that's exactly what we're doing as a government, getting on with the job. We're providing weapons to Ukraine for their defence of their sovereign country, and that does not preclude them hitting targets in Russia, but that must be done by the Ukrainians. It must be done within the parameters and the bounds of international humanitarian law.
I'm noting the stress you put on the word defence. In other words, it must be an aggressive act. Are you saying that they need target by target to get the permission of the allies who provide them with these Storm Shadows, which, to complicate matters, is not just Britain but France as well?
So we're continuing the position of the previous government in providing this weaponry for Ukraine to fight against Putin's illegal invasion. We're continuing the discussions with the Ukrainians. As I said, I've met President Zelensky and his team several times in the last 2 weeks.
But just to repeat what he said in that clip, he says, I want to be able to hit where the Russian missiles are coming from. The Russian missiles that hit Ukraine's hospitals, schools, and universities. So just for the sake of the listener who might be finding this a bit hard to follow, can you do that or can't?
So these are complex questions. I'm not going to discuss, and you wouldn't really expect me to discuss the detail of those sorts of things in public, but suffice to say, we're continuing both the previous government's position for now, and we are continuing very intense discussions with the Ukrainians, because we as a country want to do everything we can to support Ukraine's effort to fight for their freedom, fight for their country, and fight for their future.
I'm going to interpret that you want to go further if you can, and you can persuade allies to do that. Now, we often hear from summits like the one you've just been attending, support for Ukraine, talk of Western unity, talk of new weaponry coming. Quite often it doesn't arrive, or it doesn't arrive for a very long time, does it? The President said, again, when it came to air defence, that he'd been promised F-16s 18 months ago, and those planes have still not reached Ukraine. Is there anything that can be done to speed this whole process up?
President Zelensky makes that powerful argument. He makes it to us all, and one of the reasons I went to Ukraine on my second day in this job was that this is my first priority. I undertook then that we would speed up the UK aid that the previous government had pledged. I said that we would step up the military aid, but I said that we would also do more, because we have to support the industrial production that can sustain their fight. And so today we'll also be signing a treaty in Downing Street, which makes export finance available to British companies to boost industrial production directed towards Ukraine, and also to replenishing our own British stockpiles. And that really is a reflection of the fact that this is a war of industrial production, not just a war of forces on the battlefield.
Yeah, and that needs not just money, it needs production, doesn't it? And the Russians have the production, and bizarrely, given all the sanctions on them, have the money as well, it seems. Now, I know that you're launching an initiative at the moment to deal with what's called the shadow or dark fleet of tankers moving millions of oils millions of barrels of oil every week. When you say that you and Britain's allies will disrupt that flow of oil, which is critical to the war, how will you stop it?
So this was one of the subjects of discussion yesterday at the British-hosted European political community. That was a meeting of 44 European nations, part, if you like, actually, of this new government resetting relations with Europe. But on this, we're spearheading the steps that we need to take. So this shadow fleet, we reckon around 600 oil tankers working around the world that are breaking sanctions, flying under flags of convenience for countries. So what steps will we take? Well, we've sanctioned 11 ships that will be barred now from British ports and British waters. We're sharing the intelligence about the way that these sanctions are being busted by these shadow oil tankers, and we'll also work with those third countries that at the moment are providing flags of convenience for ships like this, that are not just breaking sanctions and fueling and funding Putin's war effort in Ukraine, but they're also normally in bad state of repair. They're unsafe. They switch off their tracking devices. They put other shipping at risk. So it's in our interests, as well as Ukraine's, that we put more pressure on Russia. We choke off their funds for their war effort. We stamp out this sort of shadow trade across the globe.
Just one last question, if I could, Mr. Healy, on something that isn't your responsibility but is important. Today we are digesting the news that people who protested against climate change have been sentenced to 5 years in prison. In one case, 4 years. In other cases, there are many people in the Labour Party who opposed this change in the law that the Conservatives brought in. Are you comfortable with what you're seeing? Will the government consider repealing or amending that?
It runs very deep in our British democracy and our British system of checks and balances that we have an independent judiciary. It makes its judgments about the cases it hears and the sentences it makes.
For just
Stop Oil, I think this is really a question of what are the best tactics to take people with them. We want to see the same sort of zero carbon future for Britain. We want to see Britain leading the way globally. And the question really is, I think, what are the tactics that can persuade more people of the case for that, rather than turning them off?
John Healy, Defence Secretary, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
3 minutes to wait to the weather. Helen Willis.
Thank you very much. Hello there. We might well get the 31 today, which will make it the hottest day of the year so far. That's across England and Wales. In fact, most parts of England and Wales will be hot today inland. High 20s, as I say, up to approximately 31 degrees. The morning mist and fog has cleared now. There's the very outside chance of a shower. But it is the exception rather than the rule. Also, the exception rather than the rule, a little bit of coastal fog around the Irish sea coast later. But it's warm and quite sunny, really, for most of us. Hot in places. For Northern Ireland, I think we will see a drier day, a brighter day with more sunshine than yesterday, so 21 the high. But already on the radar picture, the next weather front is coming in, and it'll move in towards Fermanagh and Tyrone later in the day. But still some good weather, decent weather around today. And we'll see that in Scotland as well. The remnants of some drizzle from yesterday's weather front, but on the whole, it's a dry, bright, quite sunny day in the north and the east, but the cloud as well will bring some rain into the Western Isles. Just 15 here, but 23 in the sunshine further northeast.
Helen, thank you. Enjoy it for a day at least, and we'll enjoy any questions tonight. Alex Forsyth joins us. She can tell us what's going on.
Hello, good morning, Nick. Tonight we're heading to Wrexham, which became Wales's newest city in 2022. Joining me there will be Joe Stevens, the Secretary of State for Wales, Lord Byron Davis, the Shadow Secretary of State for Wales, Baroness Carmen Smith, the Plaid Cymru peer, and Zia Youssef, Chairman of Reform UK. And in a week that's seen the resignation of Wales's First Minister, the King's Speech, European leaders in Oxfordshire, events in the US, I can honestly say I've got no idea what our audience will want to talk about, but I have no doubt it will be lively. So do join us at 8 p.m. here on Radio 4.
Alex, thank you. Coming up in the next hour on this programme, the Blur star Damon Albarn as the band appear in a new documentary, plus Donald Trump. We've heard clips, haven't we, already, of his speech. We'll be discussing the speech and its impact with a friend of his.
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Justin Webb and Nick Robinson. Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Friday the 19th of July. The headlines this morning: Donald Trump has told cheering Republican supporters that he survived an assassination attempt last week because God had been on his side. He's formally accepted the party's nomination as its presidential candidate. Andrew Malkinson, who was wrongly convicted of rape, has called for the head of the Criminal Cases Review Commission to stand down after a highly critical report about his treatment. The American comedian Bob Newhart, a deadpan master of monologues, has died at the age of 94. The BBC News has read this one by James Stanley.
Donald Trump has told the Republican convention that he wants to heal discord in society and govern for all Americans if he wins the White House in November. To loud cheers, he formally accepted the nomination as the party's presidential candidate. It was Mr. Trump's first speech since a gunman tried to assassinate him last weekend, and he described the shooting in detail, saying he survived because he had God on his side. Our North America editor Sarah Smith was watching and sent this report.
I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here.
The devotion Donald Trump supporters feel toward him has been magnified since they saw him survive an assassination attempt. He said he'd tell them the story of what happened tonight and then never talk about it again.
The amazing thing is that prior to the shot, if I had not moved my head at that very last instant, the assassin's bullet would have perfectly hit its mark, and I would not be here tonight. We would not be together.
In a speech that lasted over an hour and a half, Mr. Trump ran through all his favourite themes. Promises to cut taxes, end what he calls an immigration invasion, and of course, make America great again. As red, white and blue balloons poured from the ceiling, the delegates cheered, and they have plenty to celebrate. While Joe Biden is considering whether to drop out of the presidential race, Donald Trump is ahead in the polls, and his party are convinced they are on course for victory.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wisconsin.
Pressure is continuing to grow on President Biden to withdraw from the race for the White House. He has paused his campaigning because he has COVID, and senior figures in the Democratic Party have urged him to consider his position. Here's our North America correspondent David Willis.
As Donald Trump was rounding off one of the most extraordinary weeks of his political career, his rival was recuperating at his home in Delaware, isolated and still suffering from the respiratory symptoms that prompted his abrupt departure from the campaign trail. Joe Biden's political health is also in jeopardy, and it's been reported that senior members of his party, among them the former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, have met the president in recent days, armed with polling data that suggests Donald Trump could be on track for a landslide victory in November's election, with correspondingly dire implications for Democratic candidates lower down the ticket. Yet the 81-year-old president has shown no sign of a willingness to make way for someone younger.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky will address the cabinet in Downing Street this morning, the first foreign leader to do so in person in nearly 30 years. Mr. Zelensky has told the BBC he hopes the new Prime Minister will become special, as he put it, in his approach to international security. The President has been speaking to our political editor, Chris Mason.
In the nearly 2.5 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the UK has had 4 Prime Ministers. Volodymyr Zelensky finds himself getting to know the latest incumbent, Sir Keir Starmer, while praising the consistency of the UK's support for Kyiv despite the political turbulence. West has been drawn into direct conflict with Moscow. Number 10 this morning is emphasising attempts to disrupt Russian ships carrying oil to aid its war effort, and, it is claimed, sometimes doubling as listening stations.
Andrew Malkinson, who spent 17 years in prison for a rape he didn't commit, has said the chair of the Criminal Cases Review Commission must resign after a damning report on its treatment of him. The report said Mr. Malkinson could have been freed after 5 years, but investigators failed to follow up evidence. The Justice Secretary says she's starting the process of sacking Helen Pitcher, the chair of the CCRC. Mr. Malkinson told this programme the culture of the entire commission needed to change and that many innocent people were suffering.
I know at least half a dozen people who I'm convinced are innocent, but that's obviously it's got to go through the process. But if the process is so deeply flawed as it is, people aren't getting access to justice and they're languishing in prison for decades. It's a kind of a human rights atrocity that's happening.
The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has condemned what she's called the shocking scenes in Leeds last night, where a bus was set alight and a police car overturned. West Yorkshire Police have described it as serious disorder. Residents in the Hare Hills area were warned to stay in their homes as crowds gathered, some of them throwing objects at police. There were no injuries. Tom Reardon, who's the Chief Executive of Leeds City Council, told this programme the violence was sparked by what he described as a family incident.
We always, intervene where we need to, where children are at risk, and it was an incident that was probably misinterpreted, I would say. Obviously it was a shocking incident for everybody, and it's something that we don't want to see in our city. It was a small minority, but a significant minority of people who were doing that. It's shocking. They need the full force of the law, as the police have said.
A major technical problem with computer systems appears to be affecting companies and government agencies across the world. In Australia, operations at media outlets, airports and supermarket chains have all been disrupted. Problems are also being reported in the UK, Israel and the United States. American Airlines is among those affected. The telecoms regulator Ofcom has announced that phone, TV and broadband companies will be banned from imposing inflation-linked price rises during a contract. From January, providers selling new deals will have to set out any price increases up front and in pounds and pence. Here's our cost of living correspondent Kevin Peachy.
Ofcom says many customers are left confused and unable to budget for price rises linked to future rates of inflation. About 6 in 10 broadband and mobile phone customers have these percentage-based but unknown price rises written into their contract. But from the 17th of January, any new deals must make clear in pounds and pence what and when price increases will come during a contract. Customer complaints about the issue rose when many were hit with double-digit mid-contract rises when other bills were soaring. Ofcom says the move will make deals easier to understand and compare when customers are shopping around.
The government has appointed a leading academic to carry out a review of what children are learning in English schools. Professor Becky Francis will consider whether the current curriculum is too narrow, with too much focus on academic subjects. In her first interview as Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson said too many children were missing out on creative interests and sport. She said children from disadvantaged backgrounds in particular needed access to a broader range of ideas.
What I want as a parent for my children, and I know that parents across the country will want, is that when their children leave school, they're well prepared for what comes next. That they've had a great education that has given them a strong foundation in academic basics, but alongside that they've had a range of opportunities, whether that's through music, sport, art and drama.
New figures from the Office for National Statistics show that government borrowing in June, the difference between public sector spending and income, was £14.5 billion. That's £3.2 billion less than in June 2023 and the lowest June borrowing figure since 2019. The American comedian Bob Newhart, whose deadpan expression and flustered style of delivery won him lasting fame, has died at the age of 94. He emerged on the stand-up scene in the 1960s after a short stint as an accountant, winning Album of the Year at the Grammys for The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. He later had success on television and in films. As our arts correspondent David Sillito reports, seemingly ordinary characters such as the driving instructor proved to be groundbreaking.
In an era of slick comedians and rapid-fire jokes, Bob Newhart's slight stammer and polite bewilderment rather stood out.
Well, now that was fine. One little thing, now this is a one-way street.
He went on to have 2 successful sitcoms and starred in a number of movies. In Elf, he brought typical deadpan Newhart wit to his role of adopted father of an overly large elf.
You're not like the rest of us. I was sure when you cracked 6 feet that it would come up.
And even well into his 80s, he was a popular and recurring character in another primetime comedy hit, The Big Bang Theory.
Professor Proton, it's an honor to meet you.
Is he dangerous?
He was, he said, a terrible accountant.
I had a kind of a strange theory of accountancy. I had always felt, if you got within $2 or $3 of it, but this never really caught on.
Nancy's loss was comedy's gain.
David Sillitoe remembering Bob Newhart.
Thank you. 8:10 is the time. Donald Trump presented himself to the world last night as a relatively restrained person. The election, he said, should be about the issues facing the country. We must not criminalize dissent or demonize political disagreement, he said. He pledged to try to end wars, weakness and chaos. Wars, weakness and chaos, he said. I could stop them with a telephone call. Illegal immigration, inflation were two central topics. He said American cities would be safe again if he wins. And while he spoke, speculation continued into the fate of the president. Joe Biden said to have COVID, being reported by credible sources this morning that he is close to stepping down from the campaign. Barack Obama believing Biden's chances of winning against Donald Trump are diminishing, according to the Washington Post and the Associated Press. The leaking of that view, apparently an effort to force Biden out after initial private conversations, did not do the job. But last night was Trump night. In a moment, a Trump supporter on the meaning of the speech. But first, the BBC's North America correspondent, Nomi Ikar, was in the convention hall.
The Republican Party is very much the party of Trump.
I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States.
Walking out on stage, Donald Trump again sported that thick bandage on his right ear, signifying how he cheated death. He received this rapturous applause, and from the excitement on the faces of the audience, the adulation, it really felt like being in one of those mega churches that you find in America, with Mr. Trump receiving treatment as if he were a messiah.
I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here. But I'm not. And I'll tell you, I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God.
The former president said he would only talk about his assassination attempt the once because it was too painful. Following the events of Saturday, he had indicated he wanted to focus on unity, that he'd changed his speech because he wants to bring people together. And he did do that, sort of. He soon fell into the usual themes of political persecution without evidence.
We are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, and we must not criminalize dissent or demonize political disagreement. In that spirit, the Democrat Party should immediately stop weaponizing the justice system and labeling their political opponent as an enemy of democracy, especially since that is not true. In fact, I am the one saving democracy for the people of our country.
All week, the Republican Party convention's agenda has been about making America wealthy, safe, strong, and great again. And Mr. Trump used those themes to talk about key policies such as inflation, illegal immigration, and he made bold promises regarding foreign policy.
I will end every single international crisis that the current administration has created, including the horrible war with Russia and Ukraine, which would have never happened if I was president, and the war caused by the attack on Israel, which would have never happened if I was president.
Earlier in the evening, just before he gave his speech, he was sat in the family and friend box with his sons, and the wrestling legend Hulk Hogan fired up the crowd, ripping off his shirt.
Let Trumpomania rule again! Let Trumpomania make America great again!
And that combative message was echoed by Donald Trump and his supporters constantly throughout the speech. They seem to have taken on a new slogan born out of that assassination attempt.
I raised my right arm, looked at the thousands and thousands of people that were breathlessly waiting, and started shouting, "Fight, fight, fight."
For the Trump faithful, it was everything and more. What did you think of Mr. Trump's speech?
Warm, winsome, personal, relational, powerful.
Everything you expected it to be?
Yes, and more. His tone, his spirit is great.
Did you find a different side to him? Do you think there was a different tone?
100%. There was definitely a different side to him. I thought that it was, I think he's softer, he's stronger, he's
It's been nearly a decade of Donald Trump, ever since he came down the elevator to announce he was running to be president. And after he lost the election in 2021, the January 6 riots happened, it seemed it was over for him, with the Republican Party trying to move away from him. But with a criminal conviction, other indictments, including accusations of trying to overturn democracy and an assassination attempt, he has now advanced one of the most stunning political comebacks in American political history.
That was not Eric Bowell reporting. Is he softer? Is he stronger? Those things to be addressed in an edition of Americast, the podcast, which will drop quite soon. Do tune into that if you are interested in those things being discussed. But right now, let us turn to Trump himself and his speech. I've been talking to the Republican convention spokesperson, Elizabeth Pipko. I asked her first, as a friend of Donald Trump, if she saw a change in him brought on by the shooting.
I've been around him enough time that I do feel comfortable and confident saying that I believe this man wanted all of us to come together for the last 2 years now. I understand that he's been portrayed in a different light by the media, but I can honestly say the man that I know, the man that I've been around, the family I've been around, truly wants America to be successful.
But I suppose
and
the point is that he's used very different language, hasn't he? Very different language about people and indeed about his fellow Americans. And it was really striking to those who watched the speech that the language was, for him, very, very inclusive. And I wonder whether that does come, at least in part, from the shooting.
I'm sure in part that it does. Look, I know there's been tough language, right, from both sides of the aisle in our country from the last nearly 8 years. I completely acknowledge that. I also acknowledge that Donald Trump has been put through a lot, especially a lot of attacks on his character and his family, which may have maybe brought out the worst of him in moments. But I'm glad that people were struck by the fact that he was calling for unity in the speech. I'm glad that people recognize that and notice that. But clearly he's been affected by what happened, and I hope that the tone of this speech that I think a lot of people have related to and been comforted by, I hope that tone remains for the next 4 months from both sides of the aisle, by the way, because that's what the American people deserve, and I think that's the best way to try and actually unite this country moving forward.
And when it comes to the detail of the speech, I mean, there were some sweeping things, very Trump-like sweeping things in it. I will end the immigration crisis, he said, by closing our border. Easier said than done, to put it mildly. But he also said, I will end every single international crisis, including the horrible war with Russia and Ukraine. It's reasonable to ask, isn't it, how do you end that war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Ukraine fighting back, which wasn't quite how Donald Trump put it. But there is a suspicion that the ending of that war comes with a phone call to Vladimir Putin and Ukraine having to give up territory.
There's obviously reason to ask the question of how someone might end the war. Obviously, it's been ongoing for quite some time now with no end in sight, if I'm being honest. I would let him answer himself, of course, on how he intends to end the war, but I think what's important is that, despite what a lot of people say about him, he does intend to end the war. I do not see him trying to end the war by appeasing Russia. I genuinely don't. As someone with a background, parents and grandparents who escaped the Soviet Union and Russia, I can tell you, no part of me would work for a man that would do that. But for me, it's about his statement, which he says regularly, which is that he wants innocent people to stop dying. That goes for Russia and Ukraine. It goes for what's going on in the Middle East. It goes for what goes on around the world. He genuinely wants no war. That's been his message for a very long time. And for him to call for an end to the war, I think is the most basic and obvious promise.
Yeah, it's an obvious promise, but it contains absolutely no detail, not only with Russia and Ukraine, but also in the Middle East as well. No detail about how it would happen. And indeed, he attacked Joe Biden for the Afghanistan retreat and pulling US troops out. But that was actually Donald Trump's policy, wasn't it, when he was president?
I mean, it didn't happen under Donald Trump's watch, obviously.
But it was his policy.
You can say that the retreating was his policy, but I genuinely believe it would have been handled in a very different way. Look, when it comes to what's going on in the world,
certainly a lot going on, no question about that. Elizabeth Ditko, friend of Donald Trump and a spokeswoman for the Republican National Convention. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
21 minutes past 8. When you say there's a lot going on, there's a lot not going on around the globe this morning. There are mass IT outages affecting companies all over the world, causing real and rather dramatic problems. Our technology editor, Zoe Kleiman, has just been getting her head around what's going on. What can you tell us, Zoe?
Morning, Nick. Well, as you say, there is absolute chaos in some parts of the world. This outage appears to be affecting everything from airlines, train lines, airports, banks. We understand that Sky News is currently off air. The London Stock Exchange has reported technical issues this morning. It is a massive issue affecting lots of different services and companies around the world. I wish I could tell you exactly what's going on, but at the moment we don't really know. We know that Microsoft says it's investigating an incident to do with its US cloud service, and we also know that there are lots of reports that there's a company called CrowdStrike which does sort of antivirus software, if you like, and there are lots of reports suggesting that it has issued an antivirus update that has gone horribly wrong and is bricking Windows devices. Now, whether these two issues are the same thing or whether it's a perfect storm of two big things happening simultaneously, I don't yet know, but it certainly sounds like it's going to be causing a lot of havoc, as you say, this morning.
Well, I'm looking at a screen for where we normally watch our friends and colleagues, rivals as well, at Sky News. We apologise for the interruption to this broadcast. We hope to restore the transmission of Sky News shortly. I think there are people getting messages using 3 or 4 train companies this morning, saying that they won't be able to get their tickets or have their reservations used. I mean, this could cause really serious disruption, could it not?
Yes, I think potentially it could. Certainly this morning we're looking at peak time, aren't we? People trying to get into work, people booting up their computers. We're probably going to be finding in the next hour or so, as certainly in the UK, people start work, more problems emerging as people realise whether or not their companies and their services have been affected. CrowdStrike is a very big global cybersecurity provider, which is used by quite a lot of people, as I think we're now finding out. And I think it's an interesting lesson, isn't it, in how reliant we are on these providers and these services, and how little we can do when something completely out of our hands knocks them out. I guess what we probably will see today is lots of creativity as innovation as people try to work around the issues and keep things going for as long as they need to. You know, the thing with outages, I've reported on so many of these, and sometimes by the time you get on air, they've already solved themselves, so they can disappear as quickly as they appear. But it does appear in this case that something so widespread that's already having knock-on effects is not going to be something that's going to be fixed in the next 10 years.
To get news, didn't we, from Australia overnight, New Zealand, Japan, India. It's only quite recently that news has come through. Incidentally, if you're listening and you're experiencing a difficulty, you can tell us anything about it. Do WhatsApp us 0330 123 4346. But any company that uses Microsoft, which are stock exchange, banks, train companies, airlines, supermarkets, we mentioned our friends at Sky News, you could face real disruption. For how long, we don't know, but there could be real disruption. And Zoe, just to reassure you, our nice friends behind the glass are just printing out all our scripts. So we don't have to rely on these computers.
Very good planning. I'm glad you still have paper in the office. I think a lot of people will be pleased about that today.
Well, we don't normally. I'll let you get off because you've got more to find out. And as soon as you find anything, come back.
I certainly will.
And tell us what you can about what's going on. Plenty of rather smug Mac users have been in touch saying, not us, no difference.
25 past 8, talking of things that are reassuringly analogue. Here's Gary in the school. Morning.
I'll tell you what, I get them to do a photograph. I've got my clipboard, the favourite clipboard in my hand. Good morning from Troon. Grey and overcast, there's a keen wind. Grey skies. I'm standing by the clubhouse, just by the putting green, and not 40 minutes ago, the world's most famous player, Tiger Woods, arrived. Ian Carter is with me, correspondent. So, 2 hours they've been playing. Situation.
The big move that has come so far has come from Marcel Siem, the German. He's just got through the postage stamp. He's just birdied it. He has covered the first 8 holes in 5 under par, so he's got it to 3 under par. He's within 3 of the leader, Daniel Brown, and Shane Lowry, of course, he's going to be among the early starters. 9:47,
5 under par, 1 shot off the lead.
It is a great pleasure to welcome a great champion. Tom Watson won the Open Championship 5 times. Tom, good morning.
Good morning.
One of those Open victories was at Troon in 1982, so there must be so many memories for you this morning.
There's some wonderful memories. We're standing on the putting green here. Darren Clark, champion here several years ago. He's putting, practicing, getting ready for his round. And I remember when we played here, the wind was in a different direction. We played it downwind for the outward 9 and into the wind and the incoming 9, maybe the toughest incoming 9 into the wind that there is in Open Championship golf. And so it's played differently. The boys were out there in the practice rounds with different wind, and now it's different now. So they had to learn it yesterday. It was a brand new course yesterday.
And you won 5 times. You won other majors, of course. On the morning of an Open, were you ever nervous, or did it get to be a bit old hat, Tom?
It was never old hat. The good thing about it is that I'd played enough competition where I finally figured out my nerves some, and you always kind of try to keep a certain level of pressure, and that you never want to get it too high. And sometimes it's hard not to get it too high, and other times when you hit a great shot, the pressure goes away, and you have to be aware that when the pressure goes away, you can make a mistake, which I did several times.
Let me ask you about Rory McIlroy. He's won 4 majors, but not for 10 years. You won 8 majors in 8 years. Is there a golden window, and once the window's closed, it doesn't open, and is that the case for McIlroy?
Well, you look at past players, for the most part, the players are, it's about a 7 years, about a 7-year stretch, 8-year stretch where they really play well.
Interestingly, do you remember how much you won here in 1982 for winning the Open in pounds? Do you know? Can you remember?
No, can you tell me?
£32,000.
Wow. Well, my first victory was at Carnoustie, and I won £16,500.
Goodness me! So when the player will win 3.1 million, what do you think about prize money today?
Well, more power to them. It's just the game has certainly accelerated for the years that I've been associated with it, and it's wonderful that the players can do this.
Why were you so successful as a golfer?
Well, I think my dad taught me. My dad taught me a lot about how to play the game. He never was satisfied with an unsolid shot. If I hit a good shot that ended up close to the hole, but I didn't hit it squarely in the club face, he said, that wasn't a good shot, son. So he always prodded me to hit the perfect shot.
In 1982, the stand just behind me, there was a 17-year-old boy sitting in there, and his name was Ian Carter, and he went on to be the BBC's golf correspondent. Did he inspire you?
Yeah, he most certainly did, and most especially in 1977, the Jewel in the Sun. That made me fall in love with golf. That made me want to come here to Troon to watch the Open, and I sat in that grandstand right there, Gary, and saw Tom Watson with the Scotland the Brave scarf up above his head after victory.
Right, we're into predictions. What's going to happen over the next couple of days, Ian?
I think Shane Lowry will continue to go very well. These are his conditions. I saw Scotty Scheffler yesterday play Tom Watson-like golf in Troon in 82. Just kept the mistakes off the card. He can still be a big factor.
Tom, what's your prediction?
Well, I certainly like the way Shane putted yesterday. He putted the eyes out, and it looked like everything was going in the middle of the hole, and he had some trouble with his putting, but yesterday it certainly proved to be his benefactor.
It's lovely to see you, and just a quick thought, would you love to go out and wander around the course with the clubs today? Would you like to do that this morning?
That would be, I still have memories of doing that, and yes, there's a little bit in me I'd like to be teeing it up right now.
Lovely to see you, a great champion. Tom Watson, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Ian Carter and the golf team, they're on 5 Live from 11 o'clock this morning. 35 minutes earlier, test match special starts. The second test, England made 416. Ollie Pope 121. West Indies start their innings. That is the situation at Troon.
Gary, thank you very much. Well, here at number 9 is Lauren Laverne with this list.
My castaway is the composer Erilyn Wallen, whose starting point varies with each new composition.
Sometimes I have a clear inspiration for the feeling of the work or the energy of the work, and then sometimes, particularly if I'm procrastinating, which
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is due to address the UK cabinet this morning. It follows talks about further support for Kiev at yesterday's Blenheim Palace meeting of European leaders. Donald Trump has formally accepted the Republican presidential nomination in his first public speech since the attempt on his life. He moved on to more familiar political ground, attacking the current administration's record on immigration and the economy. LBC weather, dry, hot and sunny for many, but cloudier in Scotland and Northern Ireland, a high of 31 degrees.
LBC.
Introducing the Galaxy Book 4 Edge, the new Copilot Plus PC from Samsung, packed with AI features. Purple, Monkey, dishwasher.
Whoa, look, AI can't do everything, but with the Snapdragon X Elite processor, the Galaxy Book 4 Edge delivers phenomenal performance and up to 22 hours of battery life, so you can create and connect like never before.
That sounds brilliant.
The Galaxy Book 4 Edge laptop. A new AI era begins. Buy now from Samsung.com. Battery based on brightness, 150 nits and airplane mode on.
Checkatrade are so confident in the quality of the trades on checkatrade.com, they want to shout it from the rooftops. And from the understairs cupboard. And who better than Amir, an electrician from Croydon, to do it for them. Ready, Amir? Let's do this.
Only quality electricians like me get on checkatrade.com, and if you book through them, they'll guarantee our work up to 1,000.
And it says are confusing mid-contract price rises for phone and broadband customers. From January, firms must inform customers of any price rises included in their contract. President Zelensky will visit Downing Street this morning to brief the cabinet on the situation in Ukraine. It will be the first time in more than 30 years that a foreign leader has appeared at a cabinet meeting in person.
Thank you, Jane. 27 minutes to 9. More now on the computer chaos that is being experienced around the globe, shutting down some banks, causing problems at the stock exchange, train companies and airlines, supermarkets, broadcasters like Sky News. Let's catch up with what we know from the man who for a long time was head of the National Cyber Security Centre, Chief Executive of the NCSC. Kieran Martin joins us on the line. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
Do we yet know, or can we be sure that this is, as it were, computer cock-up rather than conspiracy or hacking?
Not for sure, but that seems the most likely assumption at the moment. Within the last hour, the causes of it, I mean, this is all heavily caveated because it's developing so quickly, but some light has been shed, we think, on the causes of it. There is in cybersecurity terms, a very well-known company called CrowdStrike that a lot of major companies use for all sorts of corporate network protection, and as with any other network service, they provide updates. They have a range of products under a brand they call Falcon, and their Falcon sensor update, which a lot of companies will use to detect threats and so forth, seems to have been misconfigured in such a way that it wrecks Windows. And so if a company is using both CrowdStrike and Windows for its operating system, it seems that they get what people in the trade call the blue screen of death, and Windows doesn't work. And that's why airlines aren't able to process, presumably why Sky hasn't been able to broadcast. It's also why, just simply for time zone reasons, it seems to be emerging first in Australia.
Blue screen of death, what a phrase that is. In other words, that Microsoft simply doesn't work. I mean, that's simply a blank screen.
Pretty much. These complex systems always operate interdependently, so the cybersecurity to do its job, the cybersecurity tool has to be able to interact with Windows, so companies spend a lot of time, money and effort on both sides of that equation, making sure that they're compatible. When you're deploying these things, you have to make sure you don't destabilize all the parts of the network. That works. Occasionally, it appears that that's not the case. It's very rare to be as serious as this. You asked essentially, is this cock-up rather than malevolent activity? Whilst I think this sort of thing is rare, just total major accidents are not unheard of. I mean, a few years ago, Facebook was unavailable globally completely because it accidentally deleted itself from the internet by misconfiguring something called DNS, sort of domain name routing that the internet depends on. So these things do happen, and I think we assume that because of the seriousness, if this was an attack, it would be such a serious one. We assume that this is an accident, and it's very plausible that it's an accident until evidence emerges to the contrary.
Kieran Martin, thank you. Just bringing you up to date. US Airlines have issued a global ground stop on all flights. That's United, Delta and American Airlines have announced that. Ryanair are warning of potential disruption across the network. Departure boards are frozen at Edinburgh Airport. Lots of companies in Australia are very heavily affected. Sky News, as we've been saying, is off air entirely, although still posting on X on Twitter. If you like, Berlin Airport has got delays. Series of train companies, Govia Thameslink Railway brands, Southern, Thameslink, Gatwick Express, Great Northern have said that they have widespread IT issues across their entire network. So this is a developing story, and it is clearly very serious.
24 minutes to 9 is the time now. Closing arguments in the espionage trial of the US journalist Evan Gershkovich have begun in Russia. He, of course, works for the Wall Street Journal. He faces charges that he, his employer, the US government as well, all very clearly deny. Let's talk to Steve Rosenbaum, Russia editor. But all of this, Steve, taking place behind closed doors, is that right? We don't really know what's going on.
Well, exactly, yeah. I'm inside the courthouse in Yekaterinburg. I mean, a few dozen metres away from courtroom 5A, but I have no idea what's going on inside. All we know is what the court official told us a short while ago, that the third hearing in this trial had begun, and that we're up to the stage of closing arguments. They certainly seem to be rattling through this trial at a rate of knots. I mean, yesterday's hearing, the second hearing, have been brought forward from mid-August to yesterday at short notice. That was unexpected, and the fact that we're on to closing arguments in the third session suggests that we are nearing the end of this process.
And an end that brings us where? In the sense that this is not, this is an independent court process. There is a political side to this, to put it mildly. What do you think the balance is at the moment of the possibilities of him being released on some kind of a deal?
Well, I think the speed of all this raises the question, why the hurry? Could it be an indication, for example, that some kind of deal has been done between Russia and America to bring Evan home after the trial? The short answer to that is we don't know. The long answer to that is we do know that Russia and America have been discussing some kind of deal for some time. We know that Russia is open to the idea of some kind of prisoner swap, if it gets what it wants. And the Russians, they don't hide the fact really that they look at jailed Americans as bargaining chips, as some kind of currency that they can trade in at some point to get Russians back who are jailed abroad. So put all of this together and add comments made by senior Russian officials over the last few weeks and months, and you have to think that there is a chance that perhaps some deal could be reached, but we don't have any details of that at the moment.
Steve Rosenbaum, thank you.
It is now 21 minutes to 9. AI draws much of its power from digesting, processing and understanding billions and billions and billions of words online, which allow those so-called large language models to generate answers to questions based on what others previously thought and written. A growing number of organisations are claiming that their copyright is being violated by the tech firms. The latest is the website Mumsnet, which is threatening legal action against OpenAI. Mumsnet's founder, chief executive, joins us in the studio. Good morning to Justine Roberts. Good morning. What's bothering you?
What's bothering us is that I think a lot of the big LLMs have been scraping data to build their models. It's against our terms of use. It breaches copyright, and ultimately what will happen is they're going to build applications that allow, like ChatGPT, where you can ask questions of it. They're going to give answers based on the content they've lifted and stolen, and no one will have any need to go to these websites. So ultimately they're going to put them out of business, and more of the commerce and content on the web will be owned by a few Silicon Valley giants.
Just be clear what you mean by scraping. They literally pick up all that information amongst all your thousands of users over the years have produced.
So we've got 6 billion words plus on Mumsnet, and they send their little bots in, and the bots lift the HTML code, and that means they can reproduce in full the entire database. Now that's been happening for years because Google did it to index, but there's a value exchange there for publishers. Google index our content and then they drive traffic to websites, and that's what websites are creating their content for. But in this case, there's no value exchange. I mean, ironically, ironically, we would love to work with OpenAI because we think they need our corpus of work, which is female dominated, quite unusual, usually female conversation, because we know they've got gender bias issues. So it's not that we don't want these models to reflect women's voices, but they really need to compensate publishers for what they're doing.
Yeah, you're ready to deal. You can have access to our material if you credit it and you give us a
I think look at the world, LLMs are coming, they're incredibly useful. You will have used them, they're not going away. And we want them to be as good as possible and to reflect women's voices too. So yeah, we would talk to, we have been talking to them.
There are even people out going, what is that large language model? For people who really don't do this, don't use any of these chat bots at all, ChatGPT, I should say, or indeed OpenAI. Give us an example. Are you meaning that there may be an online exchange of mum's day about a proper way of bringing up a child or something based on all these human experiences, and they can just reproduce that without the need to have any of your users?
Absolutely. In fact, you can go in and say, what would mums think of this? Or what would the mums think of this? Or what's the consensus on mums about this issue? And it will refer, in fact, to individual posters and threads, and it's pretty obvious it's been ingested.
Now, OpenAI in the past have suggested, we asked them to comment on this one, in the past have suggested that publishers can opt out of having their website and content used for training publishing. Are you aware of that?
So that, so latterly we've become aware of this, and we can put in a little message that says, effectively, please don't log me. And I think they will take notice of that, although some people have suggested there are ways around that, but and we've put that notice in, but it's a bit like telling people you've got to put a notice up to the burglar specifically that gives the name of the burglar, or they will sue you and they have every right to sue you.
Kirsty Roberts, Old Mum's Day, thank you very much indeed. If OpenAI will get in touch.
And 70 minutes now, just a further word on these Microsoft outages that are causing problems around the world. We've had a WhatsApp from Bristolers that are trying to book a GP appointment. So this is an extension now of those who seem to be involved. A GP appointment at 8 o'clock. We've seen the news, the app system across the NHS is down. So as well as all the other things that Nick was going through, members of the NHS or parts of the NHS also seem to affected.
The London Stock Exchange are reported have problems, but they say they are working as normal, even though they have had problems. RNS, their regulatory service.
Let us turn briefly to other matters. Blur, one of the biggest bands of the last 30 years. There's a new documentary. It's called To the End. It opens in cinemas. It looks back at the band's history. It follows them as they prepared to play at Wembley Stadium almost exactly a year ago. A live album of those concerts also released next week, and Damon Albarn has been giving his only interview ahead of the film's release to our entertainment correspondent, Colin Bass.
What do we mean by disruption? How much disruption results in a 5-year prison sentence?
Well, you say 5 years like it's shocking, but 5 years actually probably isn't as long as you'd think they'd be like. People have said they'll probably be out in 2.
Yes, quite possibly. Yeah, they'll be out of prison too, but the sentence continues for the length of that period of sentence, doesn't it? They need just in prison.
It does, but at the end of the day, I still think it's justified. I really do.
Based on the level of disruption.
The level of disruption, if it's not just one instant like the M20, ask yourself this question. Why do we never see these people sitting out on motorways in freezing snow and cold temperatures? They only come out in the summer.
Well, no, this was November 2022. It was hardly, you can't even get a tan in November 2022, Lee.
No, I know, but we didn't exactly have a big freeze.
You're not in charge of the weather, mate. I mean, if it's November, it's November.
No, but what I'm trying to say to you is when it's freezing on the roads and there's ice and everything, you never see them out then. They're only out when it's reasonable weather. They're never out there in the winter. Yeah, I know, but we don't always get ice and snow in November.
What do you want? Do you want them only to come out when it's freezing?
Well, I'm just saying, if they're that dedicated, they'd be out there in all weathers, and they're never out there in all weathers.
So you want more disruption?
No, I'm just saying, at the end of the day, they pick and choose when they feel it's right to go and do their activity.
Yeah. Well, it's called protest, isn't it? You've got to pick a day for it.
Yeah, I know, but they always pick days when it's not that bad. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, I think what's been handed down is absolutely justified. And I think a lot of people in this country will feel the same.
to see the point about the weather that day, just a load of rubbish. Lee, thank you very much indeed. Much more to come. Coming up.
President Zelensky will today become the first foreign leader to address cabinet in person since Bill Clinton in 1997. I'm LBC's Natasha Clark at Downing Street.
Zelensky meets the cabinet. We'll bring you the details after this. 8:46 headlines on LBC. Thomas Watts. Banks, airlines and rail operators are reporting problems linked to a huge IT outage. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is due to address ministers at Downing Street this morning, and Donald Trump has spoken about the attempt on his life in a speech at the Republican National Convention. LBC weather, dry, hot and sunny for many, cloudy in Scotland.